roadmap by 2045. That's what we want to talk about. And what we're going to look at over the next two sessions, which have been split in 4 parts, is what is net zero, the why, the what, the how, and the resources. So the why is about who cares, the what is about the opportunities that the road to net zero is offering us. The how is going to focus on the skills, because that's one of the cogs we want to focus on. And we looked at the what, the why, the who, so basically the 5 W's and 2 H's you may have heard of through your lean training. And then we look at resources, and in resources we specifically look at policy and what can be done about it. So today we're going to focus on what net zero is, the why, and the why we're going to look at because people care, and we're going to look at who those people are and why it matters to you as a business, and the what we're going to look at the opportunities there is for you to play into on the route to net zero. And we split it with the 8 chapters that the government has designed. Between part 1 and 2, we'll take a comfort break. I think it would be well deserved. So let's start with net zero. What is net zero? So net zero means zero emission balanced. There is a recognition that you're probably still going to have a level of emissions, and those emissions will need to be balanced by what they call the offset schemes. So it's not about achieving net zero absolutely yourself. It's about balancing any emission that are in your systems and your processes to achieve net zero. And what you would have heard of is scopes, and there is 3 scopes in there. Scope 1 is the obvious one, the easy one, is the emission from your own activities, being your plant, being your factory, or being what you're doing. Scope 2 is the one which is well ingrained in people's minds, and it's getting you, where do you get your energy? So do you get it from renewable energy, or do you get it from coal, from gas? So that's the emissions. And the one which is taking more and more importance is Scope 3. And Scope 3 is the emission in your supply chain, and on 2 folds, from your supplier point of view, so upstream, and from your product downstream. So how easy is it going to be to recycle? How much is going to emit when you transport it to your customer? That sort of things. And what you can see here is and in terms of UK-wide company, about 80% of the companies have heard about Scope 1, 2 and 3, but only about 25% of them are actually doing something about it. So when you look at the outcome, there is a challenge and there is an opportunity. So the challenge is that a lot of companies have heard about it, 80%. A lot of companies are putting a strategy in place, 36% of them. But there is an opportunity, and that opportunity is, whereas they've heard about it, they are not doing much about it. Only 25% are actually monitoring against the 3 scopes. And whereas they are all heard about it, they're all making, if you want, an ambition. They have an ambition, a commitment, and that commitment is to deliver it by 2029 for most of them. About 47% or half of those companies don't actually have a plan. They don't actually have a roadmap. And when they think about how they're going to get there in that reduction, interestingly enough, staff education come at number 3, 44%. That's what has driven that review about skills. So you need to educate staff to get there. So the takeaway from that slide is, in one hand, you've got a challenge because a lot of companies are going to be playing in that field, and a lot of companies are going to be looking at it across the 3 scopes. But you've got an opportunity because a lot of companies are talking about it, not that many are actually doing something about it, and that creates opportunities. So why now? The why. First is your customer cares. And climate change is one of those big things in the head of the customers. And these days, the customers don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. What you do is just a representation of your values, of why you're doing it. And climate change is significant because in the top 50, it's number 2 in the world. So just below unemployment and job security. But in the UK, it is actually number 1. So people do care about that. So that's the reason. And where they care about it is in terms of sustainability. People are consciously buying greener product. And importantly for us here also, people are moving towards local purchasing. So they want to help the local businesses, they want to get the local economy, but they want to do it in a sustainable manner. And the interesting piece also in there is that they believe that businesses have a key role to play. The government won't be able to do it themselves. So eco-consciousness is coming in, it's on an increase, as well as what we refer to as local love, which is buying locally. So, and they are looking for businesses with purpose which is greater than just profit. If you're looking at the millennials, then 73% of them believe that the government is not able to get there on their own, and that's why they want the businesses to come and help. If you look at what's coming, so you've got here a list of expectations in 2025 and 2030, and what you would see the focus in 2025, which is of interest to us, is waste is going to be a big one, transport and purpose. People are looking for business of purpose. There is more than shareholder, they're looking at stakeholders. And if you look at 2030, you're looking at pollution, transport, and urbanization, which is a big trend, people moving to the cities. And one of the things you find in the Scottish plan is a 20-minute neighbourhood where everything is within 20 minutes. So the business of purpose is on the rise. The government has to step in, but cannot do it on its own. And the likely area of focus are water, air, transport, energy, urbanizations. That's what the takeaway would be from that slide. So your customer cares, and I've talked a lot about the consumer, and you may say, well, I'm not really a B2C business, I'm a B2B business. I talk to customer, I don't talk to consumer. But you need to realize that really your holy grail is about how can you answer the question before it is asked. And for that, you need to look at the consumer, because your customer is only going to be asking you what your consumer wants. In addition to that, what you will have likely to happen is the people you're going to deal with are consumers. Therefore, what the procurement people you're going to deal with at your customer are going to bring their value with them. They don't leave their value at home when they come to work. So they're going to be looking for those values I've just described. So your customer cares. Why he cares? Because they want to look at the supply chain. They want to look at that scope 3 emissions, and they want to ask you what are you doing about it, because they're going to be asked what are they doing about it. And what if you want the recommendations for CEOs is engage with your suppliers. And what does that mean, engaging with your suppliers? Is to include those emission metrics as part of the procurement standards. So I've mentioned the policy piece when we looked at the how, but you can see how your customer are going to start asking you to have systems in place, to have policies in place that reduce their emission, because they're going to look at that scope 3. So the takeaway from that is that the customer, which is driven by the consumer, will revisit their supply chain. And as part of that visit, they're going to be looking at emission matrix in their procurement strategy. So that's why your customer cares and your consumer cares. And then your employees cares. And what I mean by that, well, the employee wants to work in a company with a purpose. So it's important to them that the company has something 58% consider the company's social and environmental commitment. So you may have heard about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And that's what they want to do. In addition to that, sustainability or net zero is a good purpose. There's a purpose they can relate to, they can easily connect to. And that's why 77% of them, wants to have an impact on it, wants to have an hands-on activities. And they value that in their job. 88% of them would like to have a role to play in that purpose that the company has defined. So your employee cares. So not only your customers externally and your network, but also your employees and therefore your community cares. And the other reason they care is about employability. And in employability, the question mark is, will robots really steal our jobs? That's what people are worried about. And 37% of them are worried that automation will indeed pick up their jobs. And there is 3 waves, if you want, that's been identified for that. The first wave, which is called the algorithmic wave, is looking at data and how data will be managed. The wave 2 is looking at the augmentation, so augmented reality, for example. And in here is robotics, and that's the idea of the robot stealing our jobs. And then you've got wave 3, which is the automations, the autonomous wave. But what I think is interesting is that there is 70% of employees are prepared to consider treatment if that increase the employment process. So that's quite a drastic step. And what you find out of that is the people the most impacted by those 3 waves I just described are the people with least skills, the lowest education. The higher education people are likely to be the least impacted. So from that, the recommendation is you need to boost education and you need to boost skills. So how do you make sure your job is not going to be stolen by robots? And then it's one way to do that is to upgrade your skills. And that's why employee cares, because they see net zero as an opportunity to upgrade those skills. And your competitors cares. And what do I mean by that? Well, 40% of organizations have made a commitment. So they care. So the people out there do care. And out of those, 93% of them are committing to meet it by 2050. So people are making a commitment, and people are committing to achieve it by 2050, which is a date in the UK. Some of them, about a third, are committing to achieve it by 2030, actually. And manufacturing is one of the leaders in there. So if you think about the sector you operate into, then manufacturing is a driver. So people are keen, they are committing to do it on time. And the other thing as well is not only they are committing, but they believe they are capable to get there. So 67% of manufacturers believe that they can do it, which is an increase of 81%. But, and there is a but, is that they need guidance. 82% believe they need guidance, and that's part of what the talk today is about providing guidance today and next week. And where do they expect to get that guidance? They expect to get that guidance, first of all, from the government, and that's what we'll be looking at the plan in more details. And then you have specialist associations or membership bodies like Scottish Engineering, like SDS, Skill Development Scotland, and that's where they are looking towards to. So all I have to say, what you need to take out of that is that your competitors are on the move, and it's especially true to the disruptor. The incumbent are just riding the wave, but the disruptor are going to leverage that. And finally, you care. And what do I mean by you care? Well, Scottish Engineering did a quick, simple review with few questions last quarterly. And what it shows is 46% of you were concerned with the impact on the business that the climate change will do. And 64% were taking actions to get there and to reduce that climate impact. But the big number is 92% acknowledge the reality and recognize that something needs to be done about it and action needs to be taken. Now the next step is to actually take action. And then the other people that look at it is the financing sector, and the government. And by that, I mean conditionality is coming as a big one. And that's to get access to finance, there'll be conditions attached to it. And those conditions are probably going to be related a lot to your net zero policy, to your sustainability policy. And what you've got here is one of the biggest investors in the world, BlackRock, are moving in that direction. You can see those ESG, environmental, social, and governance requirements. But not only the funding people, if you want, the investors, but the bank are also moving into that direction. And I've got an example of Virgin here or Santander. So that's the conditionality. But in addition to that, the government is looking at it and looking at disclosure. So the same way you've got mandatory financial disclosure, the government is also looking at mandatory climate-related disclosure. And what they are looking also is tax. And that's another reason why you want to care about it, is you can see here a quote from the Economic Secretary of the Treasury, looking at implementing a UK green taxonomy and looking into that. So your financing is towards a greater emphasis on conditionality. And you've got your reporting, which is moving towards mandatory disclosure. And then if it needs be, they are prepared to use tax to get there. So that's another reason why you care. And now if I look at the other way around, the world care. So that's another reason. And you probably have heard about those Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And interestingly enough, there is no plan B and there is no planet B. And that's, last week was Earth Day, Thursday, and this is Earth Month. So it's a good timing for us to think about, what we want to do. But I thought that was quite powerful. There's no plan B and there is no planet B. So we need to make this work. So the next bit you would have would be the UN. And the UN is driving, and it's successful at driving and focusing the key stakeholders on climate change goals. And they've developed those 17 goals that are becoming these days the benchmark. And the people are prepared to pay the right price. And what I mean by that is it's right in the sense that they are prepared to pay a premium if we can demonstrate that that premium is delivering a better future for the planet, for themselves, for their neighbors, for the planet. And 80%, and the reason for that is 80% of people believe that we're going for a disaster. And 63% of them are willing to pay more for their food, for example, in order to make sure we don't get there. So what you're finding out is the desire, the desirability, which is what you always need to start with when you want to move into innovations or a new product or a new service, is there. Now, in line with that, you've got the opportunity. And the opportunity is really three big sectors: energy, hydrogen, and carbon capture. And that's the area where you may want to focus on and how we're going to get there. On energy, you're thinking about renewable, you're thinking about energy production, energy conservation. Hydrogen is seen as a new technology that people are putting a lot of money on. And then carbon capture could be storage, could be utilization, could be carbon capture and bioenergy. So all sorts of things, direct air carbon capture. So those are the three key sectors to consider. And Europe cares, right? So, and the way Europe is doing it is they've taken those 17 goals that are part of the United Nations, and that's the one they are tracking. And so, whereas United Nations has described and explained the ambition for the 17 goals, the Europe is tracking again to 17 goals. And you can see here at the top, there is the 17 goals, and at the bottom is how we're doing in our tracking. Are we on track? Are we slow mover? Are we moving? But still a lot of challenge. So the EU is matching the UN. That's the key takeaway from that slide. And when I say Europe, do it, and they mean it. And they mean it because if you look at that, the horizon, Europe Energy, for example, is looking at almost 700 million euros of investment. And as Europe as an organization, Europe as a community is lining up, to tap into, and Scottish companies can look at Horizon Europe because the UK has signed for it despite being out of Europe. They have signed for it, so it's available. And you're looking at about 700 million euros. So they are really saying they're going to put real money behind those ideas. And here you've got a couple of destinations, 3, 4, in terms of energy, in terms of renewable, in terms of carbon capture. You can see those things coming up again and again across the various plan. And then if you look at an example, a big one, which is hydrogen. Hydrogen across those four regions. So those are, whereas the previous slide was looking at funding by the community, Europe, in here you're looking at local region investing their own money, if you want, into technologies. And if you look at hydrogen in across those four regions only, you're looking at 1.3 billion euros. So people are really serious about it. It's not something they are doing on the side. It's not just a trend or a fad or that's going to move away. They are really investing and doing serious money into it. And because the world and Europe cares, then the UK cares, obviously. And they are matching the Europe. So if you think Europe is matching the UN, the UK is matching the Europe. And the way it's come through, and you may have heard of, is the Prime Minister 10 points. And it's looking across those four key 10 points, and it's looking at energy. So you've got like offshore, you've got hydrogen, you've got nuclear, UK-wide, which is less relevant in Scotland, but it is relevant UK-wide and Europe-wide. Countries like France and Germany are relying a lot on nuclear. And it's looking at transportation, being public, being plane, being ferries. It's looking at, energy use, energy storage, heat, carbon capture, name it, and nature, which is the agriculture piece of it. So you can see, again, the same points are becoming through. And then Scotland cares. And Scotland has developed those performance framework, which is made of 11 goals. And again, there is a correlation between those UN goals and the Scottish goals. And Scotland is matching those UN goals. So Scotland cares. So you've got the world, Europe, the UK, Scotland. And finally, why doing it? First of all, because it's the right thing to do. And there is a recognition now that achieving zero increase in temperature is not going to happen. But achieving 1.5 instead of 2 is providing a better world, is providing a better things. And we are going in the wrong directions, and everybody's recognized that, the 80% I've mentioned earlier on. But the key thing here is it's the right thing to do. It's also offering an opportunity to leave a positive legacy. And I quite like that idea of, that letter to your son and daughter. You knew about it, but what did you do about it? So let's leave a positive legacy behind us for a change. And last but not least, because if you do not, someone else will. As mentioned earlier, the disruptors in this world are going to jump on that bandwagon. They're going to go on that bus, being an hydrogen power bus, but they're going to go on it. And so if you do not, then someone else will step in. So those are really the basic reasons you need to think about when you take away. So if you look at how it all fits together, United Nations, 17 goals, that's where he started with, and they are really strong at promoting that. They are so strong and successful at it that Europe decided to align to those 17 goals, and they are tracking them. And they are planning to get there by 2050. From that, the UK created the 10-point plan, you would have heard from the Prime Minister, with an ambition of 2050. And then Scotland, from that as well, developed the National Performance Framework. And they cut it into 11 goals, or they redistributed into 11 goals. But they have a great ambition as to achieve by 2045. And one of those big goals is environment. And they have created a plan, which we'll be looking at in more details. And that plan has created opportunities. And to get there by 2045, they want to be there, the plan to be there by 2032. But to get there by 2032, we're going to need skills. And what skills do we need by 2025? Is what you would have heard as CSAT, like Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan, that's been developed by SDS, Skills Development Scotland. But to close the loop, we need you. We need Scottish businesses. Without Scottish businesses stepping in and doing it, and as I've said, people believe that businesses need to step in because the government can't do it on their own, but the government will put incentives, they will create opportunities, places where they're going to invest, but we need Scottish businesses to step in, and when they do, and we as a community do, then you start closing the loop and answering those goals. So that's how it all fits together. So that really concludes part one and food for thought, and why should we do it, and why now, and why it matters. So I would suggest we take a quick break, 5-minute break.
5-minute break, yeah, perfect.
And so I've got 9 o'clock, reconvene about 9:05.
Yeah, just after 9:05. Okay, I think it's 2 minutes past 9 just now. So
Right.
Back and ready to go at 7 minutes past 9, no later.
9:07, okay. I shall see you soon for part two. Okay, so I hope everybody is back. I think it's time for us to move on to part 2. So I hope I've made it clear why now in part 1 and the reason why you should consider having that, at least a policy, a roadmap, you know. And what we're going to look at the one now is that roadmap. The roadmap which is offering opportunities. And I mean by that opportunities is that's what the government, that's where the government is going to put their money. That's where they want to accelerate. That's where they want people to invest. So they are prepared to do that. And we look at 8 chapters. They split that roadmap into 8 chapters: electricity, building, transport, industry, waste, land, agriculture, and new technology or negative emission technology. So, as I said, Scotland has developed those national performance framework. Out of that, there is the environmental piece, which is the climate change plan, which from an environment addresses 8 at least of those UN goals. So you can see the link between the Scotland's national framework and the UN 17 goals. So that's the correlation, and the goals are 2, 5, 7, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So that's where they have an impact, and they've created a roadmap, and that roadmap is going from 2020 to 2032, and it's leaving, there's no stone unturned. So it's looking at traveling, being active travel, being buses, being plane, being ferry, being cars. They're looking at travel in general. They're energy, and that's energy transition, electrification. That's looking at generation as well as usage, looking at renewables. It's looking at bioenergy. It's looking also in the world of waste and recycling and plastics and that area, and food waste especially. It's looking at everything to do with carbon captures, return scheme. So as I said, they are looking at it from every point, and that's why they've split it in 8 different chapters. And those are the ambition for each chapters. So electricity will come to 100% renewable by 2029. And then building is about heat and consumptions. Transport, we've all heard about hybrid cars, hydrogen cars, electric cars. Industry, so there is a big hope on industry, and that goes to 2032. Remember, the target is 2045, and industry will be on a downward trend, but they are planning not to stop at 2032. Whereas building, transport, and waste, they reckon we're going to reach a flat level where we won't be able to go any further. The other area is land use, and land use is likely to increase emission because it's not always absorbing CO2. Agriculture is another area where they want to focus on, and especially we'll look at that, but we'll hear about woodlands, we'll hear about peatlands, and then what some companies are doing about it. And the big thing is to get there is they're going to need negative emissions. So they're going to need to extract CO2, but they don't see that coming in until about 2030 and increasing. And that's where you've got the total, which you can see it's a nice trend downwards up to 2032 with the ambition to end up at 0 in 2045. So those are the chapters. So if I look at the first one, chapter 1, they call it electricity. And what you've got, so in terms of electricity, they're looking at R&D and innovation. They're looking at decarbonizations. They are looking at generation through wind farm, through renewables. So you have heard about tides, you have heard about waves. So that's what they are looking at, but primarily decarbonizations and switch from electricity. So what's the ambition? The ambition is to decarbonize and to a certain extent to actually export clean electricity. They think they've got such a potential that they'll be able to export it. And what industry are going to be impacted? So you need to think about energy infrastructure, so it being the generation of it, but also being the distribution of it, so the transmission network, and the outcome of it. So that's where carbon capture and storage come in. That's the energy infrastructure. You're thinking about electric vehicles, hydrogen and heat pumps. So electric vehicle, that's for transportation. Hydrogen, that's going to be for resources or heat or the change, the decarbonization, and heat pump and for building. So those are the sort of industries that are going to be impacted by that. And what are the actions? What are they doing about it? So there is strong support for wind farm, being onshore and offshore, like floating. There is strong support for clean power plant, and that's moving from coal power plant, for example, to bioenergy power plant for the infrastructure. So that's where they're committing. Carbon capture is another big one. They are doing a big commitment to that. You would see the work done at St. Fergus, Acorn, that sort of thing, Acorn. And they want to look at the role of bioenergy, and the reason they're interested by that, we'll come back to it, is land use and agriculture. So in all of those chapters, what they are also doing is what they call a call to others, and the others are going to be the businesses, are going to be the UK government, and are going to be individuals. So they recognise, as the consumer recognise, that government on their own can't achieve it. They need other people to help them. So that's electricity. The next chapter is building. And what's the roadmap for building? Then the roadmap is to 2030. It's looking at, again, heat efficiency in buildings, heat network, and again, decarbonizations. You can see some keywords keep on coming back up. Heat pump, we've talked about it. Regulations, that's another area where they will be prepared to go if they need to. You get efficiency, decarbonization, supply chain, and heat network is another area where they want to do. So in terms of building, you can see how they want to look at what they can put in place to minimize heat loss and to improve heat supply and energy use. And local projects like heat pump, like your own electricity, like so you hear about solar panel. So that's the roadmap to 2030 for building. So what's the ambitions, right? The ambition is heating, and all building across Scotland need to reach zero by 2045. And the industries that are going to be impacted are heat pump, heat networks, so developing a network, hydrogen again, and construction is a big one in there, and in terms of retrofitting as well as new build, and making sure the new build are sustainable. So what actions are they putting in place? And you've got standards and regulation, which is related to planning mainly, and what expectation they're going to be in terms of standards of housing. And again, investment, putting their money towards it. They've got a broad approach to it, looking at tax, obviously, at the worst end, to at the better end, looking at speaking with people who are having a more holistic view of it and getting the people involved. And the enabler for that, that's what they want to put in place, is they recognize is heat pump. And it's local heat and energy efficiency. So you may have heard about how we're looking at community generating their own power, being solar power, being wind power, community-led energy generations. So that's what they are looking at for the chapter 2, which is on building. Chapter 3 is transport. And what are the opportunities in the world of transport? Well, first of all, as your employee, remember that why now and why people care and employee cares is active travel. And the idea is they can do walk, run, cycle to work. That you would have heard about that. But then it's looking at every side of transport. Bus, and being commuting bus, or long distance bus, car, HGV, rail, plane, everything they are looking at. And how can they decarbonize all that industry? How can they encourage people to use public transport, to do active travel? And that's where your consumer and your employee, remember your employee is a consumer. So that's what they're looking at. So what's the ambition they've got for transport? And they've put together a transport strategy, but really is to reduce unsustainable travel, which is exactly what we're doing today. Is we could have all meet in a room somewhere like Scottish Engineering and spend a lot of CO2 emission through your transportation to get there. But today, I think we've got something like 70 odd people joining the call with zero emission, or just about zero, if I ignore the power that my laptop is using to do the presentation. So what's the industries? The industries are the passenger transport. So think about everything from bus to train to plane. E-commerce is going to be a big one, and logistic and freight, because people have moved to e-commerce. Now people are realizing after COVID that they can do everything from the comfort of their home, and Amazon is creating an expectation that you can get things tomorrow. And they are playing into it through their frustration-free packaging. So that's where you're seeing the industry. So actions they want to do. They want to do actions on active travel. So in order to reduce the cars, the mileage done by the cars, they want to work on decarbonizations of flight, of bus, of ferries, as much as they can. So that's something you would have heard through the rail cluster, for example, which is quite a big player in it. So that's the idea of Chapter 4, transport. That's where they want to do. So that's when you look at that, and you look at those chapters, and you look at those actions piece, or those, that's where you can see your opportunities. Where do you want? So the question we answered in the first half was, why do you want to do it? And there is a lot of good reason why you want to do it. Now the next bit is, where are the opportunities for you to play into? Is that an area you want to be in? Is that something you're already in there? Is there something to move into? So that's what we need to think about. And we looked at Chapter 4, industry, which is probably the most relevant. And what we're looking at here is we're looking again decarbonization. We're looking again at hydrogen. And what you see here for industry is the ETS, which is a trading scheme, and the recognition that it will need trading scheme because the likelihood that the industry will be net zero is unlikely. So we will need to do a trading scheme. A trading scheme is simply, to put it bluntly, as planting trees. If you think at Brewdog, for example, what they've done is they've bought land, they bought peatland, woodland, and they're going to be planting tree to be, actually their ambition is to be carbon negative, around net zero. But that comes at a cost, trading schemes. And then, so the best way to minimize that cost is to minimize your emission, so you go less to trades. And then in terms of areas, you've got everything to do with carbon capture. So carbon capture, it could be storage, it could be utilization, it could be bioenergy, it can be direct air captures. So there's a lot of area, hydrogen, carbon captures. And then in these areas, that's where there is a plan to leverage a lot of the offshore skills, that oil and gas skills that we've got in this country. So what's the ambition of the government, right? So it's to decrease by 43% by 2032. So if you remember that roadmap, they had an ambition by 2030, 2035, 2045. and that to get 0 to 2045. So what are the industries? So in terms of industry, they're looking at partnerships. All those I've just described involve a lot of industries, being the carbon capture and the Acorn project, for example, being the hydrogen project. They all need partnership because not one entity can get there on their own. And the big is, we'll talk about it, is the negative emission technologies. There is actually a whole chapter on it, but they will be done. So what are the actions? What are they saying they're going to do? Well, they're going to make money available through, for example, the Energy Transition Fund. You're talking about £62 million, £100 million for the Green Job Fund, and there is going to be a call on that. So how can you do that? £5 million for carbon capture. So again, is there an area you want to play into? There is hydrogen, there is energy, emerging technologies. So you may have seen the new tide system that's been on the move to Orkney this week, the biggest tide system in the world. So those are where they are planning to do. So the question again here is it an area you want to play into? Does that make sense? Do you play into it already? That's where they're going to put their money. So is there an opportunity for you to move into that if you're not there already, and then do some good out of it? Next chapter, which is chapter 5, is on waste and the circular economy. A big thing, the circular economy. Again, a buzzword, and how you play on it. So what does a roadmap look like? That's how it looks like. And again, what is that looking at? So it's looking at waste, and waste being food waste, waste being plastics. It's looking at recycling. What can it do with recycling that waste? How can you? Circular economy is about getting value out of waste. And the big thing is about segregation. Another big thing happening, which is probably less relevant, is the return scheme, which is coming up and is more relevant, I would say, for the food and drink industry. But that's being implemented. And you've got landfill and the recognition that landfill creates greenhouse gases. How do you capture them? How can you capture them to use them? Another waste, what can you do? And they're looking at textiles and everything. So you can see they're looking at everything. So what's the ambition, right? The ambition is to decrease the emission from waste. And the industries they're going to want to look into are constructions, as you can imagine, because there is a construction waste. And there was some work done by the university about how to make bricks out of recycled waste to rebuild the construction side of it. And there is the TIA, I think, energy and the engineering construction industry is looking at that. Agriculture is another one, especially in terms of food and generating food and food waste. And then energy, again, because how do you use circularity? How do you use waste to create energy and recovery? If you think about the 4 R's, the last R is probably recovery. And plastic. Plastic is a devil at the moment for the right or wrong reason. I'm not here to judge, but that's a perception from the consumer. And that's what I was saying earlier on. The consumer drives everything. So your customer may come to you and say, well, I don't want this delivered in any plastic anymore. I don't want any plastic shrink wrap around my pallet, for example. But that is driven by the consumer. It's not driven by the customer. So even if you deal with the customer, then you need to look at what the consumer needs and expectations are. What are their actions? So build a circular economy, I've mentioned that, and looking at the 4R, which is about reducing, recycling, recovering. So that's, you've got reprocessing, you've got more R's, you've got remanufacturing, looking at it. But do you need to remanufacture? Instead of remanufacture, can you develop something that lasts on forever? So that's coming on the quality side of things. So that was chapter 5 on waste. Chapter 6 is on land use and forestry. And the rise, one may argue, is got less connection to Scottish engineering. It's still fairly significant because it is probably an industry you supply equipment to. And really in land use, they've got 3 areas: forestry, woodland, and peatland. Another forestry is about repopulating our landscape with trees. Woodland is about managing all this, and peatland is about, pardon me, regeneration. So that's why you keep seeing coming up, and that's why the example I used earlier on of Brewdog, they bought peatland to regenerate. The other one is this Ray on Isla, who also use a lot of peatland. So what's the ambition? Is to restore that biodiversity. So that's why you think about forestry, and it's about also regenerating and restoring peatland, really restoring woodland, and how you use land to achieve that. So they've got 2 key pillars, I say, forestry, which is forestry and woodland I've put together, and then peatland. That's really the 2 areas. And the idea here is obviously, unless you are in a farming industry and work in those areas, then it may be difficult to see the connections. But do you supply to is your customer involved in those areas? Do you supply to that customer? And the actions is about, as I said, what they're looking at is land use and partnership. They are looking at the blue economy in forestry and how they can use that for bioenergy. So if you think again about hydrogen, you've got the green hydrogen and the blue hydrogen. So how can they have a role to play in the green hydrogen? So those are opportunities you want to look at. And from land use, we go to agriculture. And that's, if you want, to chapter 7 on agriculture. What you've got here, again, it's about how you manage agriculture. So you've got the organic piece of it. You've got, again, the use and the biomass. So if you can bioenergy and carbon capture, that's what it is. Can we use the land to do biomass? Can we farm biomass? And there is a strong connection use and agriculture, so that's where you see woodland and peatland coming through again, and also the big one that's coming through for agriculture and support, and that we used to have the common agricultural policy that support that, but was conditionality, and that's something you're going to see coming more and more. Conditionality, people are going to put conditions to get there, to get the funding, to get the money. So as I said, those are the actions the government is planning to put in place, but those will be linked to conditions, to you having done something about it. So the ambitions is obviously emission reduction. The industry is obviously farming, but also tourism, which is big in Scotland, but also the supply chain. And then, so how do you have a wooden frame house, for example? And the food and drinks is obviously a key one in agriculture. And then for actions, it's about doing it better, doing it differently. So at the top of my head, you would have IGS, which is looking at vertical farming and looking at the trend of urbanizations and how they can use that, how can they do things differently, and how can they do more with less. So that's what you have. And the big one in agriculture is livestock emission, because that's another one. So that's why people are arguing for, moving towards more, I would say, vegetarian-based diet, more plant-based diet than meat-based diet. So there is a list of actions, and again, in agriculture, you may not be directly involved, but is your customer involved? That's what. And if he isn't, have you got a potential customer that could be involved in that? So that's what, again, opportunity you need to think about. And last but not least is negative emission technology. And that's really what is planning to change the process, with where not only we're going to reduce our emission, but we're going to take emission back out. So we're going to take back out what we put in. And for that, you've got obviously the stop the emission, which is all deteriorating to hydrogen and decarbonization. I've already mentioned bioenergy. But to take back out, you need to look at capture. And the first thing is to capture any emission coming out of the new technology, and as carbon capture storage, that's basically like the blue hydrogen. But you're looking at taking things out, and that's direct air capture, DAC, and that's trying to diminish that. And that's what the ambition is the ambition of NET is to take emission out. So instead of just stopping emission, it's about taking them out. And a lot of that is related to bioenergy. So again, because trees and farming and agriculture helps taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So that's why you see the link with the previous two chapters. But it's also about capturing carbon out of the air, so direct air carbon. But those are long-term views. But they are potential, they are new, they are in infancy. So their actions is on NET in general. It's about emerging technology, which they're promising £180 million. So they are serious about it. Is that an area, have you got idea, innovation, things you want to do? So that's chapter number 8. But again, a list of opportunities for you to look at. So where do we fit in? So our support program is based on webinars initially, and that's the first one. And we have part 3 and 4 next week. And then we are planning some more specific webinars over the next 12 months. And we're also proposing to have one-to-one support on a support basis, one-to-one. And for that, I would recommend that you make a note of interest to Scottish Enduring if you want to do a one-to-one, and we'll be happy to support. So that's our program. That's how we want to help. We want to help you understanding why you need to do it, and understanding that's what we're doing today, why we want to do it, and what the opportunities are. So that's what we've done today. Today we looked at net zero, we looked at why, and then who cares and what. And next week we'll be looking at the how. And by that we mean what in terms of skills. Why about green recovery, who, your employees, when is when you need it, where can you get those skills, and how do you bring those skills in-house, and not least how much, what funding, what help is available out there for you to bring those skills in-house. And we look at resources, and by that we'll focus significantly on policy. What is your policy? Do you need a policy? When you've got a policy, how do you manage that policy? What commitment are you doing, and what roadmap are you building? How smart is it? Which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and last but not least, time bound. So that's what we're looking at. So we hopefully convince yourself and your team that it's the right thing to do for you, for your family, for your community, for your employees, for your shareholders, for your stakeholders. And then with part 2, review the opportunities and decide where you want to play. And if you've got the skills necessary to play there, that's the idea about it. And then next week we'll look at those skills and how. So I would like to thank you all for having taken the time this morning to join us and to listen to that. I hope you find these are values, and I hope I'll be seeing you next week for part 3 and 4.
Stuff.
Paul?
Yeah, do you want to stop sharing the slides? Well, thanks, Eric. I hope, like me, you found that really compelling. A lot of detail, a lot of information. I know that Sarah stuck in the chat that we'll make the resources available on the website. We'll also make the information, the recording as well, will be shared to everyone ahead of next week. We are in good shape for time, which is always nice on a webinar. I know we had a couple of questions came up in the chat, but people already jumped in and answered them, and most of them were about signposting to the information that we share today. I'm going to give it a minute. If anybody has got a question or a comment they want to make, they're happy to take that. They can come off mute and ask their question. So I'm just going to give a pause for a few seconds to allow anybody who wants to do that. So, doesn't look like we've got any questions out there, which is fine.
Wait, a question. What training, that we could have for our team, like NEBOSH environmental management certificates, would that be beneficial as a starter on this roadmap?
So the training will, I think you're thinking about IOSH, so they've got a choice, and we'll talk about that next week, but really it's what is referred to at OSF, which is on the job, social or formal, and you can get on the job training if you've got the skills in house and you've got train the trainer process, or you could get formal, and then after that it will depend on what sort of training you want. Where you go and who you speak to depends on the training you want and the area of training you would like to do.
Eric, is it fair to say that one of the things that you might touch on next week is what a route map would be if you're a company who's already ISO 14001, and how you might use that as a building block going forward? So
what we'll talk about next week is it's about the need to have a commitment, an ambition, and then it's a smart piece. So having a roadmap and having a roadmap time bound, and then looking at you're correct, looking at the skills, which is I think what got mentioned there, and do you have them? And if you don't, where can you get them? And then how do you get them? So that's what we'll be looking at.
Ideal, yeah. And notice that one just come up in chat there. And thanks for the additional comment. Malcolm, hopefully that's okay. So hopefully we'll answer a bit more of that next week. And as we said before, if not, that'd be a perfect opportunity to say, let's set up a one-to-one, and we'd be happy to talk directly.
Happy with the answer today. We'll talk more next week, and we'll do a one-to-one with our team if we need to. Yes, that'll be fine.
Great stuff.
Okay, thanks.
And anyone else got anything else this morning? Anything else they want to add? Thanks for the comments in chat. It's good to see.
I see 50,001 has been mentioned. I think again it's one of those standards. I'm not sure the standards looking at the green side of energy is looking at energy consumption, but how green is that consuming energy? I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, in that case, I think what we'll do is let everybody get 19 minutes back of their schedule this morning. And again, thanks everyone for coming along, and hope we'll see you all again next week. Thanks again. Bye.
Thanks everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you. Cheers. Very much. Excellent. Catch you later, guys.